Welcome to this class, which is a summary of Learning Unit 7, dealing with transnational issues, the flow of people. This learning unit covers three forms of international communication: intern, migration, diplomacy, and international tourism. And this class will cover all three in full. Course Assignment 1 draws specifically on the diplomacy section, particularly the subforms of diplomacy and the concept of soft power. That material will get extra attention, and it is marked throughout with a gold Assignment 1 focus tag. Keep an eye out for those tags as we go. The learning unit is organized around three major forms of international communication involving the movement of people. As we've mentioned already, migration, diplomacy, and international tourism, bookended by a short introduction and conclusion. We'll cover the introduction, then move through the history and forms of migration before spending proportionally more time on diplomacy, section 7.4, since that section, and specifically its treatment of soft power and public diplomacy, is what Assignment 1 asks you to apply directly. We'll close with international tourism and the learning unit's own conclusion. The study guide organizes this unit around 10 crucial questions in total. These 5 are the ones most directly relevant to what follows and to Assignment 1 specifically. What is migration and what's its impact on the global flow of people? What is diplomacy and how do states actually use it? What forms of diplomacy exist? What are the comparative benefits of soft power versus hard power? And running through the whole unit, how do migration, diplomacy, and tourism actually interlink as related forms of international communication? By the end of this presentation, you should be able to answer each of these confidently, with the diplomacy and soft power questions ready to apply directly to the SA-US tariff dispute. Learning Unit 7 opens by grouping migration, diplomacy, and tourism together under one idea. All three are forms of international communication built on the physical or symbolic movement of people across borders. And Appadurai's 2008 work reminds us this movement has real cultural, social, and political consequences, not just logistical ones. Migration is introduced alongside the societal tensions it can produce: intergroup tension, xenophobia, and sometimes violent conflict. Diplomacy is defined as a communication system through which state representatives clarify positions and persuade others to support their view. And tourism is framed as generally positive, promoting intercultural understanding, but with a caveat worth remembering: it can also produce manipulation, misinformation, and cultural imperialism. Tension we'll come back to in section 7.5. The study guide summarizes the history of migration in 3 waves. The colonial wave saw thousands of Europeans, sailors, soldiers, administrators, missionaries, traders move outward to colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Americas, while the forced migration of over 15 million enslaved Africans supplied the labor for colonial mining and plantation economies, producing what we now call the African diaspora. The Industrial Revolution wave from the 1800s into the early 1900s saw rural Europeans fleeing poverty and famine for urban centers, often into factory conditions that were long-houred, low-paid, and unsafe, not unlike sweatshop conditions in parts of the world today. And the post-industrial period, covering patterns since World War II, is more diverse and multi-directional. Guest worker programs recruited labor from Europe's periphery to rebuild Western Europe. Decolonization produced post-colonial migration from former colonies back to the colonizing states, and the US ran its own guest worker scheme, the Braquero program, recruiting Mexican labor to address wartime shortages. Sorrells identifies 4 patterns linking migration to globalization more broadly, and they're worth knowing as a set. First, advances in transport and communication technology enable frequent multidirectional migration flows and genuinely transnational networks of people, rather than one-way journeys. Second, the integration of global capital and markets has concentrated wealth and worsened inequality, both within and across nations, driving new patterns of rural to urban and south to north migration. Third, neoliberal policy has displaced millions of people who've lost jobs, land, and livelihoods as a direct consequence. And fourth, escalating conflict, both within and between states, has pushed unprecedented numbers of people across borders in search of safety. The study guide's own conclusion to this section is worth remembering. As these cross-border flows challenge the power and sovereignty of the nation-state, states respond by reasserting control through increasingly restrictive immigration policy, physical walls, and surveillance. In short, a world in motion, driven and disrupted by powerful forces. The study guide identifies 4 forms of migration. People migrating with the intention of taking up permanent residence typically move through a temporary visa or work permit before applying for permanent status. Guest workers or temporary workers have actually overtaken permanent residence migrants in number in many parts of the world. They often come from less developed regions and are willing to work for lower wages in jobs that the host country's own population is unwilling to do. Refugees represent forced migration, people fleeing natural disasters, war, or political upheaval. And the study guide includes a striking statistic here. Africa holds only about 10% of the world's population, but around 25% of the world's refugees. And illegal migrants, distinct from refugees, typically leave due to socioeconomic hardships like poverty and unemployment, and raise a distinct set of challenges for host governments around border control, visa overstays, and labor exploitation. Reasons for migration split naturally into push factors and pull factors. On the push side, high population growth combined with poor socioeconomic conditions in developing regions pushes people to leave. Conflict, war, and ethnic cleansing force people out, and natural disasters like drought, famine, floods, and earthquakes have always been a driver of migration as a basic survival strategy. On the pull side, aging, shrinking populations in developed countries create demand for what the study guide calls replacement migration to fill labor shortages. Remittance money sent home benefits migrants' families and dependents, and increasingly ICT and social networks like Facebook and X sustain what Landis in 2008 calls a transnational migration space. Migrants stay meaningfully connected to their country of origin in a way earlier generations of migrants simply couldn't. This case study that is presented in the study guide centers on a striking Castells quotation. Global networks are helping create a new public sphere in which global civil society, communication networks, and global governance intersect, creating transnational connections outside the control of any single government. Moraes' 2009 research applies this directly to diaspora communities, showing how technology enables migrants to organize, communicate, and assert a political and cultural voice across borders in ways that were unavailable to earlier generations of migrants. International communication in this context becomes a genuine tool for outcry and unification among dispersed communities, not just a way of staying in touch, but a way of maintaining collective identity and even political influence from a distance. We now move into section 7.4, diplomacy, the single most important section of this learning unit for assignment 1. The next several slides cover diplomacy's definition and subforms, the media's role in diplomacy, propaganda, cultural diplomacy, and finally, soft power versus hard power, which is the concept assignment 1 asks you to apply directly to the US tariffs and South Africa's response. Every one of these slides is tagged as assignment 1 focus, so treat this whole section as high priority material. Diplomacy, per Gilbauer's 2000 definition used throughout the study guide, is a communication system through which state representatives clarify positions, articulate grievances, and try to persuade others to support their viewpoint. 3 subforms matter most for assignment 1. Formal or secret diplomacy is government to government, governed by established protocol and characterized by total secrecy and exclusion of the media and public. Closed-door diplomacy is a middle ground. It satisfies both the diplomat's need for private talks and the media's need for some information. So the dates, venue, and participants of talks are disclosed, but the substantive content stays behind closed doors. And open diplomacy is conducted visibly, with negotiations accessible to media coverage and public scrutiny and debate. When you're analyzing the SA-US tariff dispute, ask which of these 3 modes each stage of the dispute reflects. The initial social media announcement and the subsequent face-to-face talks sit quite differently on this spectrum. This slide covers the media's own role within diplomacy, which is distinct from diplomacy's formal subforms. Public diplomacy is where state and non-state actors use media and other communication channels to influence public opinion in a foreign society, not just to communicate with the other government directly. Media diplomacy or media broker diplomacy goes a step further. Journalists temporarily assume the role of diplomats themselves, acting as mediators in international negotiations. And the agenda-setting concept, drawn from Severin and Tankard, is one of the most quotable ideas in this section. The media may not be able to tell the public what to think, but they are highly effective at telling the public what to think about, simply through repeated coverage. One nuance worth remembering for Assignment 1, Gilbao notes that officials exclude the media entirely from the most sensitive security and political talks, but allow much fuller media access where relations are friendlier and the stakes are lower, which gives you a useful lens for thinking about why the SA-US tariff dispute moved between more and less visible modes of engagement. Propaganda is treated here as a form of traditional diplomacy, typically used by one state against another when relations are antagonistic, aimed at long-term results. Laswell's classic 2010 definition describes it as the management of collective attitude through the manipulation of significant symbols, the goal usually being to build a favorable image of a country's policy, conduct, and political and economic system in the minds of another country's ordinary population. The study guide's case study here is a powerful one. Thorne's 2007 research shows how the African National Congress used international communication through traditional pre-digital methods to expose and counteract apartheid government propaganda, building international pressure and solidarity for the anti-apartheid movement. The study guide also poses a reflection question worth sitting with. Is a campaign like Proudly South African propaganda, diplomacy, or genuinely both? There isn't always a clean line between the two. Cultural diplomacy is closely tied to soft power, and the study guide describes it as a government-driven effort to build a country's image through culture rather than politics. Language teaching, educational exchange, exhibitions, and academic or sporting exchange. The scholarship examples are worth remembering. The Fulbright Scholarship is offered as the classic example of American cultural diplomacy operating at a genuinely global scale, and the DAAD Scholarship serves the same function for Germany. South Africa's own National Research Fund Scholarship is offered as a contrasting example. It's a form of cultural diplomacy too, but operating only at a national scale, since it's limited to South African citizens rather than reaching outward to foreign publics. And one point worth holding on to, Hayden's 2012 work reminds us that cultural diplomacy begins at home. It's not only about how a country is perceived abroad, but also about reinforcing that same image among its own citizens. So here we come to the single most important slide in this presentation for Assignment 1. Hard power refers to military instruments and coercive economic tools, sanctions, tariffs, force, and achieves its aims through coercion or financial leverage. Soft power, by contrast, works through communication via culture, values, and ideas, achieving its aims through attractiveness rather than coercion. Taylor's 2007 framework, which the study guide adopts, distinguishes two time horizons for soft power: long-term strategies like cultural and educational exchange that build mutual confidence over years, and short-term strategies like media-based information dissemination that can shift perception more quickly. The reason this distinction matters so much for your assignment is that it gives you a precise vocabulary for classifying the US tariffs, economic coercion, so hard power, against South Africa's diplomatic and cultural responses, which are much more likely to fall on the soft power side. And there's a genuinely important point buried in this theory. Countries without significant military or economic leverage can still exercise real influence through soft power, and it costs far less, both financially and in human terms, than hard power does. This slide is built specifically to help you with Assignment 1's questions on digital diplomacy and on South Africa's public diplomacy strategy, since both require you to bring in the prescribed readings rather than learning Unit 7 alone. On media and digital diplomacy, Mutesia, Maluki, and Adar found that over 90% of South African and Kenyan diplomats surveyed actively engage with digital diplomacy, with X and Twitter and Facebook rated the most effective channels by 86.7% of respondents, a striking concrete update to Learning Unit 7's more general treatment of media diplomacy. Achieng, Kiamba and Kahwanja add a normative argument on top of that. Public diplomacy needs to shift from top-down messaging toward two-way, dialogue-based engagement. On public diplomacy in practice, Mutisia et al. Show it being used for real-time crisis communication and regional cooperation, like the SA-Kenya visa-free travel arrangement, while Achieng et al. Argue that credibility ultimately comes from sustained relationship building rather than reactive statements. Listening matters as much as messaging. And on real limits, Mutisia et al. Identify infrastructure gaps, misinformation, and cybersecurity risk as genuine constraints, while Achieng et al. Add that public diplomacy shouldn't be treated as a government-only function. Non-state actors need to be part of the picture too. International tourism is the world's largest industry, representing around 6% of total world exports according to the World Tourism Organization, and supporting over 235 million jobs worldwide as of 2009, which is a long time ago, so you can imagine what those numbers are now. Mulwana frames tourism as fulfilling what he calls the humanistic idealistic approach to international communication, a medium for cultural exchange and building of positive international relationships. Two theoretical framings are worth knowing well. McLuhan, back in 1964 already, described tourists as change agents who help build a global village where cultural, ethnic, and racial differences no longer hinder social relationships. A broadly optimistic reading. Belt's 1996 framing is more critical. He describes tourists as walking billboards or advertisements for their own culture and its consumer goods, which means tourism can just as easily become a vehicle for cultural imperialism and the spread of homogenized global consumer culture. Both readings are worth holding in tension, since they capture a genuine ambivalence in how tourism functions internationally. Several factors shape the international flow of tourists. The first is leisure time. Industrialization historically reduced working hours in developed countries, freeing up time for travel. Though the study guide notes that global competitive pressure has since begun to reverse this trend in some regions, with longer hours and less guaranteed leave. Economic factors. Ghanem's 1997 distinction between tourist-generating regions, typically developed countries, and tourist destination regions, typically developing countries, matters because weak currencies in destination regions make holidays there relatively cheap for tourists from generating regions. Technology plays a dual role. Transport technology physically connects generating and destination regions, while ICT lets tourists research, book, and share their experiences instantly and has enabled small tourism enterprises to establish a genuine global online presence. And green issues, particularly climate, shape destination choice directly. The study guide's own example is sunny South Africa, marketed specifically to European tourists seeking better weather. The study guide's own conclusion is brief but useful as a checkpoint. This learning unit examined transnational issues in the international flow of people across three categories: migration, diplomacy, and international tourism, as interlinked forms of international communication. Migration is movement driven by push and pull factors, reshaping societies and identities across borders. Diplomacy spans formal closed door and open channels, media diplomacy, propaganda, and cultural diplomacy, all underpinned by the soft power versus hard power distinction. And tourism is the world's largest industry, functioning simultaneously as a vehicle for genuine cultural change, exchange, and at times for cultural imperialism. Together, the three sections show how the physical and symbolic movement of people across borders is never just logistics. It's communication with real political and cultural stakes. To close, here's the full learning unit collapsed into a single map against Assignment 1's diplomacy and soft power questions, since that's why sections of 7.4 got extra attention throughout. For 1.4a, you need the core definition of diplomacy plus its formal, closed door, and open subforms. For 1.4b, the reasoning behind why formal or closed-door channels suit sensitive disputes, plus the media's agenda-setting role, is your foundation. For 1.4c, the general concept of media diplomacy from Learning Unit 7 gets a concrete current update from Mutisia et al.'s survey findings. For 1.5a, the hard power versus soft power distinction, plus Taylor's long-term and short-term soft power strategies, gives you the vocabulary you need. And for 1.5b and c, public and media diplomacy from Learning Unit 7, combined with Achieng et al.'s argument for dialogue-based public diplomacy, is what you need to discuss South Africa's own strategic options. Migration and tourism build the broader context around diplomacy, but this table is your direct route from Learning Unit 7 into the assignment.